Hello, my name is Charles, and today on my bench I have an 18 karat yellow gold Rolex Submariner model 16618. This is a beautiful watch, but it has had quite a checkered past. I'm not exactly sure what happened to it, but as we get into it you'll see that it's been through something. The wetsuit extension does not snap in. As you can see, I'm pointing on the screen right here to the right lug and the left lug. The right lug is much thinner than the left lug. We'll see more about that later. The bezel appears to rotate unidirectionally as it should. It's missing the dot at the top, the pip. Others call it the pearl. The owner complained that the date wasn't changing over smoothly. And it seems to be kind of hanging up. You'll be surprised at how easy of a fix this turned out to be. You can see here that the end link hood is loose and comes away. There's a little crease in the end link for some reason. Let's get this band off. And this is the bent one, so let's have a look at it. Still getting used to where my camera focuses, so bear with me. As you can see on the left side, the bottom is bent down like it was stressed very hard when the watch was pulled or something happened when it was on the wrist. And this is the other side, which is flat across the bottom, the way it should be. And looking at those lugs again, you can see the lug on the left, it's lost a lot of its gold. Somebody polished and polished and polished on that until they finally got the scratch out they wanted to get out. I don't know why they would do that instead of filling the scratch first. So we'll go ahead and pop off this bezel. Use some protective tape here to keep from scratching. Wouldn't want to have to polish the other lug off too. These just pop right off. Doesn't take much force at all. Surprising they stay on there at all, really. And looking at the bezel, I can see that the bezel insert and the bezel itself have also been replaced with aftermarket parts. Looks like that bezel is 18 karat gold at least. And I just took the watch away to open the case back. I don't have a camera set up over there by my case back opener, and I'm actually not a YouTuber. I am a watchmaker by trade, so I don't have all the camera equipment, but I am trying to get my work out there in the public eye, so bear with me. So here we'll inspect it under the microscope, and I can see the dial has been refinished. Up at the top there's a characteristic scratching where the dial went back into the case. That blue paint on these refinished Rolex dials is very fragile. It almost always scratches. I'm checking out this date complication. Still doing what it does. It kind of flops over late and gets stuck in the middle. But the movement actually looks good on this side. Nice and clean, no rust, no gummy oil that can be seen oozing out of anything. So something happened that I assume gouged that top lug very deeply, which made somebody want to polish it until the scratch was polished out of it and took away most of the gold. Probably broke the bezel insert, the crystal, and scratched the dial. And somebody refinished the dial and put all aftermarket parts back in place of the original parts. That's my guess. Post in the comment section below what you think might have happened to this watch, and I'll give you my opinion at the end. Here we're unscrewing the screws that hold the dial in place. We'll get that dial off and check out the date and see what's happening there. I can see the problem here. It's just the jumper spring is out of place. And that was an easy fix. Let's put it on the timing machine, see what it's doing. And it's running a little fast, but the amplitude is actually there's two problems. The amplitude is very low and the beat error is really high. I've probably never put a Rolex on the timing machine and seen a beat error that high. So there was some human intervention there, or possibly when this watch got whacked real hard, the beat error got knocked out like that. But I can't imagine whoever put it together not setting that right after they finished up. Anyway, we'll get to that. Since there was nothing noteworthy to see in the disassembly, I'm going to fast forward through this year so we can keep the video under an hour in length. The reassembly will be in real time. These are all the parts after being cleaned. And making a YouTube video, I had to lay them out like that because that's why I see everybody do it. But professional watchmakers wouldn't take their time to lay all that out. At least I would dump out the baskets for top of the movement, back of the movement, automatic winding rotor, some piles of what area the watch they're on, and you just pick out of your parts tray the screw you need and part you need. I was surprised how long it took to lay those out. So here we need to wind up the mainspring. It has to be taken out of the barrel to get it clean, but it has to be wound so that it's in this little dispenser that will pop it back into the barrel for us. Here you gotta be careful when you're pulling out this winder. If you pull it too fast, that mainspring pulls out in the center, it's gonna blow up on you. So now we got the mainspring all coiled up. So now we'll use our mainspring winding tool to dispense the mainspring back into the barrel. Pop it right back in there.
If you have a Rolex you would like to get serviced, please check the links in the video description below.
Some say no lubrication at all on white alloy mainsprings. Most people put just a little bit of a light grease on there. And here I'm using Mobius HP 1300 on the arbor. And 1300 here also. Alright, so we can start putting this watch back together. That's the mainspring barrel in. And here, a little bit of HP 1300. On both pivots. You gotta oil that before you put that bridge on, because that bridge covers the pivot. Usually you can lubricate the jewel once the bridge is installed, but that one's better off lubricated first. I'm going to be using a lot of HP 1300. It's used pretty much everywhere. You want your heavy oil. Your light oil would be your Mobius 9010. That's pretty much just using the escapement and balance. And then you'll use a heavy grease on the setting parts. Again, just a little bit of HP 1300 on the balance hack. This is what slides when you pull the crown out to set the time. It slides and stops the balance wheel, so you can synchronize the watch with whatever clock you're setting it to. And we're going in with the escape wheel. And the rest of the train. Some 1300 on this second wheel there. You gotta make sure the pivots are seated well in their jewels and they're lined up nice and straight so that the bridge goes on without too much fuss. Before you screw any screws down on the bridge, you need to make sure that everything's seated or you'll break a jewel or break a pivot. And there you can see it just fell into place and all the train wheels freely roll. And again, you screw that down carefully and make sure as you go that those train wheels stay loose, and hold the plate with a pegwood as you do it so that that plate doesn't come up on you. Now that we have one screw in there, we're good. Go back and tighten down that first screw because we left it a little bit loose just to be sure. Back on the barrel bridge. My actual reason for starting making YouTube videos isn't even to show servicing a Rolex watch. I'm just showing this one because it seems that Rolex watches seem to get the most views of anything, and want to get my viewership up. What I really want to get into the public eye are my pocket watch conversions, which I'll put a card up here in the top right corner of the screen where you can go to see one of those, and I'll repeat that at the end so that you can follow and see. I make modern wristwatches from abandoned size 6 and size 12 pocket watch movements, mostly from Waltham and Elgin. Just works out real well that those old movements can be made into 40 or 44 millimeter watches, which is pretty much the sweet spot for watches these days. All through the 1900s, everybody wanted small watches, 28, 30, 32 millimeter, 34, or was a big watch. So once pocket watches fell out of fashion, there was no use for the movements because they were too big to be put on the wrist, and they just weren't used anymore. So millions of pocket watches have been pulled from their cases so that the case could be scrapped for its precious metal content, and there's just millions of beautiful American pocket watches to be had that can now be cased into modern size wristwatch and taken advantage of again. So when you get a chance, look at my other videos and tell me what you think. So here we're putting in the click. This is what keeps the mainspring from unwinding itself as soon as you wind it. It pretty much does what it says. It clicks as you wind the watch, and it's a ratchet mechanism to keep the ratchet wheel from unwinding. And here we're lubricating the train wheels with HP 1300. We'll come back later and get the escapement. And now we'll flip the movement over, work on the dial side. Again, lubricate all the train with 1300. Had too much oil on my oiler there, so I cleaned it off and got a smaller drop. And now we're using this blue grease in the keyless works. The blue grease is Mobius 9501. Pretty much use this on anything that gets turned by your hand. It's too heavy to be in the train wheels and the things that get turned by the mainspring. But if your hand is cranking, this is where you put the grease that does the heavy work. So anything that interacts with the crown, unless it interacts with the crown and the mainspring, I'll show that. I'll tell you about that in a minute here. this little part here has to interact in quite a few different places. It's got to get that hacking lever on the other side of the movement. It's got to fall into this arm right here. So it takes a little fiddling with to get it to fall into place, but when it does, it does. And there's this little retaining spring here that holds it all down. Just checking to make sure everything is working like it should. When installing these springs, if you're a new watchmaker, be sure to get some pegwood on top of it before you push it into place, or you'll probably send it into orbit. Make it a member of the Swiss space program. If you ever have a watch that the crown doesn't really click out and click back in, it just kind of mushes back and forth, it's usually because of this spring right here is popped up like you see it right now. Just needs to be pushed back into place, like I'm going to do pretty soon right here. Right there. So now we're going to lubricate the capstones here on the escapement. So I pop it out of place and then grab it with some Rodico, which looks like I accidentally cut right there by accident. So the cap jewel gets soaked in one dip to get any old oil off of it. When you see it shine like this one does right here, you know it's perfectly clean. So we put just the smallest drop of Mobius 9010 on there, cover about half of the end stone. And if you do it perfectly, you just bring it in and drop it right into place. And this one, I didn't get it to drop perfectly, kind of stuck to my tweezer when I opened it. It didn't fall, but it happened to fall crooked and didn't smear the oil. As long as that oil dot stays a dot until you push it down and stays centered on the jewel. That's what's important. Kind of hard to see with the way the digital cameras have that rolling shutter, but when you wind the movement, you want to watch the escape wheel backlash, finish rolling forward, and then get to the end and actually bounce back. If it bounces back, that means your train is free and not binding anywhere. And here we're doing the jewels on the balance wheel just the same way we did on the escape wheel. Soak them in one dip and then oil them up and drop them back in. I'm not going to show this again on the other side. There's the exact same cap jewel on the escapement and the exact same jewel on the balance on the other side of the movement, and we're going to omit that. Try to keep this video as short as possible. And this is that little gear in the quick set date that pokes through that cover plate. It has that cannon pinion style gear on top. Just using the slightest bit of grease on there. This is activated by your hand when you're quick setting the date. So here I used HP 1300 because when the crown is pushed in, this is powered by the mainspring. It also happens to get powered by your hand when you're setting the time, but can't have the heavy grease in there. Rolex movements are actually easy to service compared to many other movements. They're well designed and they're chunky. They're thick. They don't try to save space. Most Rolex watches are thick by design, and on the thinner you try to make a movement, the harder it is to make it reliable and easy to service. And Rolex watches are very utilitarian. Now here, this lever gets pushed on by this really heavy spring. You have to really be careful to hold this thing back, or you'll send the lever and that little tiny jewel, I'm going to bring it in a minute, flying across the room. That guy right there. As long as that lever is nice and flat, it'll stay in place. And now we'll flip it back over. Get that pallet fork back in, getting close to starting it up. Pallet fork's another place you want to be really careful about the bridge and not breaking the pivots or the jewels, because the pivots on the pallet fork are very, very fine. The pivots on the pallet fork aren't falling into the jewels, so I put a little down force on the bridge and then wobble the pallet fork around until those pivots finally fall into their jewels. Right there. Here I'm using Mobius synthetic grease 9415. You apply a dab to the stone, rock the pallet a few times, apply a dab, rock the pallet, just to distribute it on all the teeth of the escape wheel. So now we'll wind up our mainspring, store some power. And we'll drop in our balance. And it looks like we have a nice healthy amplitude. I don't understand why the screws are so long on the balance bridge here. They're so long that you really want to slip, and your screwdriver could very easily take out the balance, so be careful when you put these in. It doesn't need to take that many turns to put in a screw. Again, I didn't show the oiling of these two because they're exactly the same as the other side. We add another 5 minutes to the video. HP 1300.
B1300. Already oiled the lower jewel when I oiled the train. We'll get this date disc in here and be finished up on the dial side. It's got to slide underneath these metal discs that you see, the 3 metal discs. It has to get underneath all 3. There's rubies underneath those discs that it glides on. So you gotta hold back that spring tensioner that was causing our initial problem when I got the watch. Get it in place and then put that tensioner back in. And then turn over this eccentric lobe here to hold the other side of the dial down. Now we'll check and make sure it jumps over crisply, and it does. And that's the main portion of the movement. Now it's just the automatic module. The watch runs without the module, without the automatic works on it, but this adds the automatic winding. I use grease here because I can't tell you how many rotor axles I've had to replace on Rolexes over the years. They do wear out fast, and that rotor is heavy. The grease isn't going to stop the rotor from turning that gear. Now here I'm putting just the lightest drop of Mobius 9010 on one tooth of the reversing wheel, and that will distribute itself around on the rest of the teeth. You do not want to put too much oil there. What will happen if you use too much oil is in a few months the reversing wheel will bind up, it'll get gummy. And when you go to wind the watch, you'll feel the automatic rotor winding around in the watch as you wind it, instead of just feeling the sliding of the mainspring in the barrel.
So here we'll put some HP 1300 on the driving wheel and about half a drop on each of the reversing wheel pivots. So we kind of try to distribute it back and forth between the two of them there. Doesn't take too much. And then we'll flip it over and do the same thing again. HP 1300. And that whole module can drop right onto the movement. You have a little HP 1300 on the jewel here. Pivot is in the automatic winding module. And now let's put it on the timing machine and see how we're doing. As you can see, our amplitude has gone from like 210 to almost 300, which is exactly where we want it. We want it to be above probably 280 or so. And that's great. The beat rate hasn't changed, of course, because we haven't adjusted that. We'll do that now. Rolex uses what's called a freeze-sprung balance wheel. And the beat is very easy to change on these just by pushing this regulator. As you can see, our beat rate went down to 2.1 now. Optimally, we want to get it below 1. Even closer to 0.5 if possible. So now that we have the beat rate where we want it and the amplitude where we want it, it's time to regulate the timekeeping. Regulation is as simple as turning the micro screws on the balance rim, backing the screws off so that the heads get closer to the balance staff, makes the watch run faster. Turning the screws clockwise so that the heads get closer to the balance rim makes the watch run slower. The timekeeping looks good now, but there's still some little specks that are out of place. There aren't two perfect little traces. The bottom trace has got some junk up above the top trace. That's usually a dirty pallet fork, or probably in this case, this extra oil. I'm gonna let it run overnight, and if it still looks like that, I'll clean the pallet fork in the morning. So now let's take a look at this bracelet, which the wetsuit extension is not clipping into place. It's just flopping around, which is an easy fix. We just need to squeeze the edges of the clasp a little bit there. And that's almost got it, but I'd like it to be just a little bit better, so we're going to squeeze this a little bit more. And now we get a nice positive hold. Almost too hard to pull out, but the owner actually asked me to remove the wetsuit extension because it was too much of a hassle for him. But that's not necessary. Now we're going to straighten out this stressed hood here, end piece. And that's got it looking good. So this watch is already pretty well polished, but it's got some abrasions and scratches here and there. So I'm gonna give it a quick polish. Rolexes and many other fine watches use brushing and polishing on the same surfaces. And in order to achieve that, we use this temperature resistant and abrasion resistant tape, which we use to mask off the areas that we want. Right now I'm going to mask off the brushed areas and polish the center link, and then I'll remove the tape and mask off the polished area and brush the outer edges. Start by cutting those nicks out and then high polish. Now I've taken the band inside, removed the tape that was on the satin areas, and put tape onto the highly polished areas to mask it off. So now I use a Scotch-Brite wheel and just lightly brush the gold and give it a brush look. Now we'll pull the tape off of here and show you what we got. And after coming out of the ultrasonic cleaner, everything's ready to assemble. The insert just pops into the bezel. You just line it up and work your fingers around the edge and it just pops into the groove. Off camera I put in a genuine Rolex pip into the bezel. I had already ordered the pip when the client told me he was sending his watch in, so he wouldn't have to wait so long for the watch to come back. But I didn't know at the time that he was sending me a watch with an aftermarket bezel. So his aftermarket bezel got a genuine pip in it now. To apply the bezel, you just get that click spring in and push it on from the side of the click screen and work your fingers around again. Once it pops all the way down, you'll be good to go, just like that. And now on with the dial and the hands. We can get this in the case and be done. Roll over the date so that we know exactly where midnight is and set our hands to midnight and get the calendar synchronized with the hands. There's midnight. On with the minute hand. The hour and minute hands need to be directly on midnight to turn over the date at the same time as the hands show midnight. You can put the seconds hand on pretty much anywhere, because if you want to try to be accurate about it, set it close to midnight, or set it close to the minute hand so that they line up.
for a day real quick, make sure it turned over at midnight and doesn't drag, and it did. Nice clean turn over the date. We're putting on new O-rings that have been lubricated with silicone grease. There's actually 2 O-rings in the Submariners that are in the tube, and the one you just saw go on the crown. And there's one more that goes on the outside of the tube, you'll see in a second. Here we go. Let's put that movement into the case. And push it in so that those case screws go underneath those wings that are going to hold the movement in place and centered in the case. Stem just pops right in. No tool needed. Now you can't see it because the camera is not looking where I'm looking, but you back off those case screws to sandwich the movement into the case. And once it gets firm, you just back them off till it gets firm. A new case back gasket that's also been lightly lubricated with silicone grease.
The watch was pressure tested off camera and passed.
And let's time it again. It's been about 12 hours since the watch was serviced. And now the amplitude's come down a little bit because the mainspring isn't fully wound. It's about half unwound. But our rate is great, and traces look good, and our bead error is great, so this one's done.
A few years ago I serviced a Submariner that had the bezel ground off, the crystal broken, the dial scratched, and the top right lug all damaged. It was the result of a motorcycle accident. The owner fell off his motorcycle and the watch was ground against the pavement, dial down. I wouldn't be surprised if something similar happened to this watch.
We'll pop on our band and send it back to its owner. Again, check the card at the top right corner of the screen and see one of my pocket watch conversions. I think you'll be impressed with how cool these 1890s and 1900, 1910s pocket watches can be. I put them in cases with observation backs so you can see a beautiful American movement. I appreciate you watching to the end. It helps with the algorithm more than you know. So please like and subscribe so you'll be notified when I post future content. And here it is, all done.